My son forgot to pick me up from the hospital, so I decided he would never forget what came next. The nurse wheeled me toward the sliding doors, her polite smile trying to mask my unease. The antiseptic smell clung to my clothes, mixed with the faint odor of overcooked cafeteria food. She asked, "Is someone coming for you?" I forced a smile and nodded. "Yes, my son," he promised. Outside the glass, the parking lot stretched into the evening. Headlights flickered in and out. Every time a car slowed near the entrance, I lifted my head, ready to see his face. But each time, strangers stepped out and hurried past me. I held my phone tight. The battery icon flashed red, 8% left. Still, I called. Ring. Voicemail. I tried again. This time I whispered, "Please pick up." The ring cut short, and his recorded voice answered. "Hey, it's me. Leave a message." My words stuck in my throat. I hung up. I told myself he must be on his way. Traffic, maybe, or he parked far. But then I called again, voicemail again and again. Each unanswered ring chipped away at my hope, leaving only a dull ache in my chest. The nurse gave me a careful look, then patted my shoulder. "Take care of yourself," she said softly before disappearing back inside. The door slid shut, and suddenly I was alone under the harsh glow of a buzzing street lamp. I stared down at my trembling hands. These were the same hands that once cooked his favorite meals, tied his shoelaces, wiped his tears. The same hands that worked double shifts so he could go to school with shoes that weren't falling apart. And yet, here I was, bandaged from surgery, shivering in a hospital gown under my coat, waiting like a forgotten package at a bus stop. I dialed again. My voice cracked this time. "It's Mom, I'm out now." They said someone had to sign me out, but I managed. "Please, I just need a ride home." No answer. Just silence. Then that familiar beep of another message left unheard. The loudspeaker inside echoed faintly through the glass. Visiting hours are now over. A reminder that the day had ended for everyone else. For me, it felt like something bigger had ended. I thought of the nights I stayed awake when he was a baby, rocking him through fevers while the world slept. I thought of the teenage years when he slammed doors in my face, but I still left hot meals by his bedside. I thought of all the times I whispered to myself, "One day, he'll understand. One day, he'll be grateful." But standing there in the cold, I understood the truth. He had already made his choice. I signed the last of the discharge forms myself, my signature shaky but firm. The clipboard felt heavier than it should, as if each stroke of ink carried the weight of a lifetime. The automatic doors opened, releasing a rush of cold night air that bit into my skin. I stepped out slowly, dragging the small paper bag of medications they'd handed me. My footsteps echoed against wet pavement. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then steadier, tapping against my coat. A taxi honked in the distance, splashing through a puddle. People hurried past, umbrellas tilted, their faces hidden. No one looked at me. I pulled my coat tighter around me, refusing to let tears show. Somewhere deep inside, a bitter thought rose up, stronger than the pain in my chest. If he can forget me now, then he's already lost me. That was the moment I knew. He'd never get the chance to hurt me like this again. I stepped off the curb into the street, alone but no longer waiting. The cab ride home felt longer than the surgery itself. The driver barely spoke, just grunted when I gave him my address. I leaned my head against the cold window, the rain streaking across the glass in thin, broken lines. My body ached in places I didn't know could hurt. Every bump in the road sent a sharp reminder through my stitches, and I clenched the seat just to steady myself. The city blurred past, neon signs flickering, restaurants crowded with people laughing, living. Their faces looked warm, alive. I felt like I was on the outside of everything, like the world had kept spinning while I lay unconscious under the surgeon's lights. I closed my eyes, hoping the motion would rock me into calm, but memories barged in instead. I remembered driving this same route years ago, his little body strapped in the back seat, kicking his feet to some silly song on the radio. He used to giggle every time I hit a bump. "Again, Mama!" He'd shout as if I had any control over potholes. I laughed with him then, even when my heart was breaking from bills piling on the passenger seat. I remembered the times I picked him up from school, waiting at the curb with a smile no matter how exhausted I was. He would run to the car, waving his drawings in the air like they were priceless masterpieces, and I treated them as such. Each one went up on the fridge, until the surface was covered in his crooked stars and smiling stick figures. I gave him everything I had. And tonight, when I needed him for the first time, he gave me nothing. The cab slowed and pulled up in front of the house. My house, my safe place, or at least it used to be. I paid the driver with shaky fingers, every dollar feeling heavier than it should. He didn't wait, just sped off into the wet night. I stood there in the drizzle, staring up at the windows. Warm light glowed behind the curtains. My son was inside. My family was inside. I told myself I'd step through the door, he'd apologize, maybe even hug me, say it was all a misunderstanding. I needed to believe that, at least for one more minute. I climbed the steps slowly, my legs weak, my side aching. I reached for the doorknob. It didn't turn. I frowned and tried again. My key slid in, but it caught halfway. I twisted harder. Nothing. I pulled it out and stared at it in disbelief. The edges were worn from years of use, from being the only key I carried with pride. I tried again, more frantic now, my hand shaking. The key refused to fit. The lock had been changed. The truth hit me harder than the cold rain. My son had locked me out of my own home. For a moment I stood there frozen, rain soaking through my coat, hair clinging to my face. I knocked once, softly. No answer. I knocked harder, the sound echoing down the quiet street. A shadow moved behind the curtain. My heart leapt. I whispered, "It's me. Please open the door." The shadow didn't move closer. It paused, then slipped away. Shame burned hotter than anger. I felt like the neighbors were watching, peeking from their windows, seeing me like this. A woman rejected at her own door. I pressed my forehead against the door, whispering to myself, "This is still my house." My home, my voice cracked. My chest ached, not just from the surgery, but from something deeper, sharper. Minutes stretched. No one opened the door. Finally, with legs trembling, I stepped back down the stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last. I looked up at the glowing windows one more time. From inside, I could hear faint laughter, muffled but real. My son's voice mingled with hers. His wife, the woman who had never liked me. They were together. They were happy, and I was out in the rain, discarded like trash. I walked down the street, clutching my bag of medications. The rain picked up, soaking through my shoes, chilling me to the bone. I wrapped my coat tighter, but it wasn't enough to keep out the cold or the humiliation. When I reached the corner, I stopped under a flickering street lamp and looked back. From here, the house looked perfect, warm, inviting, safe. To anyone else, it would seem like a picture of family comfort. Only I knew the truth, that the woman who built that home was no longer welcome inside it. My chest tightened as a taxi slowed nearby. I raised my hand and the driver rolled down the window. "Where to?" he asked. I opened my mouth, but no words came out at first. I had nowhere to go, no plan, no bed waiting for me, just this emptiness. Finally, I whispered, "Anywhere with a room for the night." He nodded, and I climbed in. The seat smelled faintly of smoke and cheap cologne. I leaned my head back, shutting my eyes as tears finally slipped free. The motel was only a few miles away. A peeling sign buzzed above the entrance. Half the letters burned out. The man at the desk barely looked at me, just slid a key across the counter. Room 12. I walked inside, the door creaking on its hinges. The smell of mildew and stale air hit me first. A thin blanket covered the bed, and the carpet was stained in places I didn't want to imagine. I sat down slowly, clutching my bag, my stitches throbbing with every movement. For the first time that night, the weight of it all crashed down on me, locked out, replaced, forgotten. But as I lay down, staring at the cracked ceiling, something inside me shifted. The pain was still there, raw and deep, but beneath it was something colder, sharper. Resolve. I used to believe a house was just wood and stone, something you bought, lived in, and left behind when time demanded it. But this place, my place, was different. It was the marrow of my life. Every corner held a memory. Every floorboard creaked with history I had built with my own hands alongside my husband. Losing it felt like more than eviction. It felt like erasure. I met Thomas when I was 19. He wasn't the kind of man who filled a room with noise. He filled it with steadiness. He was a craftsman, a man who believed that a promise wasn't words but muscle and sweat. On our wedding day, after the church emptied and the rice had been swept from the steps, he drove me down a narrow dirt road to a piece of land he had been quietly saving for. 10 acres, scraggly pasture, a dilapidated barn, nothing more. But he saw what I couldn't. "We'll build it up," he said, standing tall, his hand pressed to the small of my back. "This land will be yours long after I'm gone. No bank, no paper, no man will ever take it from you." At the time I laughed. I thought he was being romantic. Now I know he was giving me a vow heavier than the gold band he slid on my finger. The early years nearly broke us. We didn't have money, just determination. I took on tailoring, hemming pants, sewing dresses, patching coats, anything that kept $1 coming in. My sewing machine rattled from dawn until my fingers ached raw. Thomas worked sunup to sundown. Some days he returned so bone-tired he fell asleep with his boots still on. But we kept going. Together we dragged beams into place. We scrubbed mold from the old barn. We sanded planks and hammered nails by lantern light. Winter bit hard, and more than once we went to bed hungry so we could save for lumber. When the roof finally went on the house, our house, I remember standing in the yard with tears streaming down my face, not from sadness, but from the miracle of it. The front porch became my favorite place. That's where Thomas and I rocked in the evenings, talking about nothing and everything. That's where I sewed while the children we never had played only in our imagination. That porch became my sanctuary, the place where laughter lived, where arguments cooled, where silence wasn't empty but full. Years later, the tailoring shop I opened in town grew into something steady. People knew me as the woman who could take an old coat and make it new. Every stitch I sewed carried the weight of those early sacrifices, paying off debt, paying down the mortgage, keeping the promise alive. Thomas used to say I put my soul into every hem, and maybe I did, because each customer, each dollar, was another stone laid in the foundation of our life. But Thomas never stopped reminding me, "This house is yours. If I go first, it stays with you." He said it like prayer, like scripture, and then one spring morning he was gone. A heart attack, sudden and cruel. I buried him under the old oak on the north edge of the land, the same place where he first taught me how to see potential in broken ground. The headstone is simple, like him. I go there often. I tell him how the world has shifted, how the porch creaks louder now without his weight, how the nights are colder without his arm across my shoulders. After his death, the house was all I had left of him. I kept the tailoring shop alive, even when my hands stiffened with age, even when my eyesight blurred. Every month I polished the wooden floors he laid, dusted the mantel he carved, scrubbed the windows he set in place. I treated that house as a living promise, not a building. That's why it cut so deep when my parents returned and looked at it as if it were just property. To them it was a prize. To me it was Thomas. It was my life stitched into every nail and beam. Losing it wouldn't just mean sleeping in a motel bed or living out of a suitcase. It would mean betraying the man who kept his word with calloused hands and weary eyes. I can still hear him, even now. This land will be yours long after I'm gone. And maybe he was wrong. Maybe the world doesn't care about vows made in sweat and sacrifice. Maybe all that matters are papers signed in ink. But in my heart, this house is still mine, because it's where I became a wife, a worker, a widow. It's where I became me. That's why, standing in front of those locked doors, the humiliation wasn't just about being shut out. It was about being erased. They could strip the locks, change the keys, claim the deed, but they would never understand what this place meant, because a home isn't about ownership. It's about belonging, and I belong to that house as much as it belongs to me. It didn't happen all at once. Betrayal rarely does. It came in small, almost invisible cuts, sharp enough to wound, but subtle enough that anyone watching from the outside might call me oversensitive. But I felt each one, deep in my bones. The first sting came from my daughter-in-law. I had barely stepped back inside when she looked around with a smile too polished to be kind. "We've already started fixing things up. It needed a fresher touch, don't you think?" She said it lightly, as if I should be grateful. But I heard the message buried underneath. Your way wasn't good enough. Your presence isn't welcome here. I tried to ignore it, to brush past with the grace I thought age would give me. But as the days stretched, the small displacements grew impossible to overlook. The photographs were the first to vanish. The mantel had once been lined with pictures of Thomas. His smile after fishing trips, his proud posture in front of the barn, the candid shot of him painting the porch rail white one summer evening. One by one they disappeared. In their place appeared sleek, impersonal frames. My son's wedding portrait, the grandchildren's school pictures, glossy images of a family I was no longer truly part of. My son never said a word. He let the silence do the cutting for him. I went to the kitchen one morning and found my favorite chair missing, the one where I had sat for years with my sewing basket beside me. In its place was a spotless white bar stool, foreign and cold. When I asked where my chair had gone, my daughter-in-law smiled with the same measured sweetness. "Oh, that old thing? It was falling apart. We thought it was time for something new." New. That word again, as though everything I touched was unworthy of staying. Even the bedroom I had once shared with Thomas was altered. The quilt I had stitched by hand, each patch sewn during long winter nights, was gone. A sleek gray comforter replaced it. Pillows, too many, too perfect, lined the bed in a hotel room style that erased every trace of the life I had built. I stood there, fingertips brushing the smooth fabric, and felt an emptiness I hadn't known was possible. Friends who came to visit didn't help. One leaned in and whispered, "It's probably for the best. At least someone's keeping the place lively." Another chuckled. "You had your time. Now it's theirs." Their words landed with the weight of final judgment, turning my pain into something ridiculous, something I should be ashamed of feeling. And through it all, my son said nothing. His silence was the loudest betrayal of all. It wasn't just the objects they removed. It was the way they treated my presence, as if I were an intruder in the life I had built. My footsteps in the hallway were too loud. My requests for simple things, my teacup, my quilt, my photographs, were brushed aside with polite smiles that dismissed me more thoroughly than words ever could. At night, I lay awake in the guest room, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of the house being lived in without me. My body still ached from surgery, every movement reminding me of fragility, of dependence, and every detail around me whispered that I no longer belonged. It was a cruelty of erasure, not the violence of shouting or open rejection, but the slow, deliberate peeling away of identity. The house that once carried the story of my life now carried only theirs. And each change, each missing photograph or vanished chair, was another reminder that I had been written out of the story. Inside, my grief twisted into something harder. Not anger exactly, but a cold, steady realization. They weren't just replacing furniture. They were replacing me. There comes a moment when pain stops being just pain. It hardens into resolve. For weeks I had swallowed the little humiliations, let them rearrange my life as if I were a ghost drifting through my own home. But one night in that motel room, staring at the faded wallpaper and listening to the hum of the air conditioner, something inside me shifted. If they wanted me invisible, then fine. I would become invisible on my own terms. But I would also be watching. The next morning I bought a small camera. Nothing fancy, just a device I could tuck into my purse without drawing attention. The kind meant for tourists, or maybe nosy grandmothers like me. I held it in my hand as I left the shop, feeling its weight. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of control. I rented another week at the motel. The clerk didn't ask questions. Motels are good at minding their own business. Each evening, I returned from short walks or quiet meals and sat on the stiff bed, reviewing what the little camera had captured. At first it was ordinary. My son's truck in the driveway, children playing on the porch, my daughter-in-law laughing into her phone. But then I noticed things that stung sharper than knives. Small thefts. Objects carried out to the car in bags, my sewing machine bundled hastily. A box I knew held Thomas's old tools shoved into the trunk. Once late at night I saw her slip out with an armful of clothes, mine. My dresses, the ones I had stitched by hand when money was tight. They vanished into the dark as though my years of work were nothing more than rags. The footage told me what words never could. This wasn't about redecorating or fresh starts. It was erasure. Systematic, deliberate. I couldn't let it stand. But storming in, shouting, demanding justice, that would only confirm what they already whispered behind my back, that I was bitter, senile, unreasonable. No, if I acted, it had to be clean, careful, within the law, so I began researching. It felt strange at first, calling county offices, pretending my voice didn't tremble. But soon the fear gave way to focus. I asked for copies of the deed, for the legal description of the property. I learned how the land had been filed, how Thomas's name had been recorded. Each paper, each signature, was a thread I followed back to the promise my husband once made, that this house would remain ours. Mine. The clerk on the other end of the phone never knew what it meant to me when she said, "Yes, ma'am, I'll send those documents over." But I knew. It meant I wasn't crazy. It meant my memories had weight, and the law might still recognize them. At night, surrounded by scattered photocopies and handwritten notes, I began sketching out possibilities. Not revenge in the wild sense, but strategy. If they wanted to erase me, I would make sure the record itself could not be erased. My name would stay, my story would stay. The camera kept rolling. Each day, more evidence piled up. A broken frame tossed in the trash. Boxes loaded into the garage. My daughter-in-law's voice caught on a faint recording, muttering, "She'll never come back. We'll make sure of it." I watched, rewound, watched again. Not because I doubted my own eyes, but because I wanted to burn every detail into memory. Evidence. Proof. And slowly, an idea began to take shape. I wouldn't lash out. I wouldn't scream. I would use the very tools they underestimated me for. Patience, attention, the law itself. They thought of me as frail, too old to fight back. But they didn't realize that years of quiet endurance had trained me in something stronger than fury. Cunning. As I packed away the papers into a neat folder, I whispered to the empty motel room, "You've taken enough. Now it's my turn." The more I watched, the clearer the picture became. My daughter-in-law wasn't just redecorating or rearranging. She was dismantling my life piece by piece. One evening, the camera caught her dragging out a cedar chest from the attic. I froze when I saw it on the screen. That chest held my mother's quilt, my wedding dress, and the letters Thomas had written to me during our first year of marriage. She didn't pause to look inside. She just shoved it across the floor, muttering about getting rid of the junk. Another clip showed the locksmith's van parked in the driveway. I zoomed in on the side of the vehicle, the company's logo half visible in the grainy light. It hadn't been my imagination then. They had changed the locks even before I came back from the hospital. My own home barred against me while I was lying in recovery. Each discovery left me trembling, but not defeated. I was building something stronger than anger. A case. I knew I couldn't do it alone. So one morning I swallowed my pride and knocked on Eloise's door. She had lived 3 houses down for 40 years, a widow like me, and one of the few people I still trusted. When she opened the door, her eyes softened. "You look tired," she said. "I need help," I admitted. My voice cracked. "I don't think I can fight this battle alone." Over tea at her kitchen table, I told her everything. The motel, the camera, the footage, the missing heirlooms. She didn't laugh, didn't call me paranoid. Instead, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You're not crazy," she said firmly. "I've seen them moving things. Boxes, furniture. It didn't feel right. If you want me to, I'll testify to it." For the first time in weeks, I felt less alone. Together, we went through the footage. Eloise pointed out details I might have missed. Timestamps, license plates, the way my son avoided the camera's view as though he knew something wasn't right. Her sharp eyes turned what felt like guesswork into evidence, but evidence was useless unless I knew how to use it. That meant taking a step I'd dreaded, calling a lawyer. The office smelled faintly of old books and floor polish when I walked in. The lawyer, a middle-aged man named Harris, listened without interrupting as I laid out the story. I showed him the folder of documents I'd collected from the county clerk, the footage on my small camera, and the notes Eloise had helped me organize. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said carefully, "what you're describing is cruel, yes. But the law doesn't punish cruelty. It punishes theft, fraud, and trespass. If we can prove they've removed property that isn't theirs, or that they tampered with your deed, then we'll have something concrete." His words sank into me like stones. Cruelty wasn't illegal, but stealing was. Lock-changing was. "So what do I do?" I asked. He tapped the papers in front of him. "First, we secure what's left. You should update your will immediately. Better yet, we create a living trust. That way, ownership of the property is locked down in your name and passes exactly where you decide. No one can override that unless they drag you into court. And with this evidence, they won't want that fight." I nodded slowly. "And the camera? Keep it running. The more proof you have, the stronger your case. If they're selling items, pawning heirlooms, or hiding assets, we'll use that against them. But do everything quietly. Don't let them know you're building a file." It was the first time in months someone had given me a roadmap. That afternoon, I signed the papers to create a trust. My hand shook as I wrote my name, not from weakness, but from relief. For once, I was ahead of them. Back in my motel room, I set the folder on the bed and stared at it. A piece of paper couldn't heal betrayal, but it could protect me from further loss. I whispered Thomas's name under my breath. "We're safe now. They can't take this from us." The footage continued to pile up in my camera's memory. One clip showed my daughter-in-law laughing with a friend as she carried a box to her car. "She won't even notice," she said. Another captured my son standing silently by while the old rocking chair, Thomas's chair, was loaded into the garage. His silence was louder than her cruelty. But now, instead of despair, I felt something else. Each clip was no longer just a wound. It was a weapon. The small wins began to stack. Eloise agreed to keep a written log of what she saw from her porch. Harris promised to file preliminary paperwork that would freeze any attempt to transfer the deed without my approval. And I each night sat with my stack of papers and whispered to myself, "You are not powerless. You are not gone." The motel didn't feel so empty anymore. The air conditioner still hummed, the wallpaper still peeled, but the space had become my headquarters, not my exile. Every piece of evidence, every form signed, every ally gained, it all built toward something larger. For the first time since that lonely night outside the hospital, I believed I might win. Some nights in the motel were harder than others. The hum of the air conditioner became a kind of mocking lullaby, and the smell of stale coffee seeped into everything I owned. I would lie on the stiff bed staring at the water-stained ceiling, wondering how a life built over decades could shrink to 4 beige walls and a nightstand with a flickering lamp. I thought of Thomas constantly. His hands, calloused from years of work, always gentle when they held mine. I remembered the night he carried me over the threshold of that house, his voice low as he whispered, "This is our place. No one can take it from us." He believed that with all his heart. And for years, so did I. But now those words echoed like a cruel joke. The footage on my little camera was piling up. But instead of feeling like evidence, it felt like a pile of stones crushing me. What if it was all useless? What if my son and his wife had already beaten me in every way that mattered? One night I even began packing my bag. I folded my clothes, stacked the papers into a neat pile, and stared at them. Maybe I should just let go, walk away. I was tired. I was old. The law was slow, and my heart, already cracked, felt close to breaking. I sat on the edge of the bed with my head in my hands, whispering Thomas's name as if he could answer me from wherever he was. "I tried," I said, "but I don't think I'm strong enough anymore." The next evening, Eloise convinced me to go with her to a small neighborhood gathering. Just a few people on a porch, she said, to get me out of the room. I didn't want to, but I went anyway, thinking maybe it would numb the ache for a while. Instead, it broke me open. My daughter-in-law was there. She spotted me immediately, her lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. In front of everyone, she said, loud enough for the group to hear, "Oh, look who's here. Guess you finally decided to leave the motel." A small laugh rippled through the crowd, polite but poisonous. I froze, humiliation burning my cheeks. She went on about how change can be hard at her age, and some people just can't keep up. Every word was a knife. But somewhere beneath the shame, something else stirred. Not weakness, not despair. Something stronger. As I walked back to the motel that night, the cool air on my face, I felt the tears drying before they could fall. Her public humiliation hadn't broken me. It had woken me. Thomas's words came back, not as a joke this time, but as a promise. No one can take it from us. I unlocked the motel door, looked at the folder of papers on the bed, and whispered to the empty room, "I'm not done." Resolve is a strange thing. Once it hardens, it spreads through your body like steel. That night after the party, I stopped being the woman who begged her son to answer the phone. I became the woman who would make them answer for what they had done. I had evidence, yes. But evidence locked in a motel room was useless. It needed to breathe, to be seen, to become undeniable. So I began planting it where it couldn't be ignored. First came the public record. I filed copies of the footage with my lawyer and asked him to notarize every page of the written logs Eloise kept. "Paper is powerful," he told me. "Once it's on record, no one can erase it." I also requested certified copies of the deed and trust we had created. Harris smiled when he handed them to me. "Now," he said, "you're armed." But legal armor wasn't enough. My son and his wife had already mastered the art of silencing me in private. What I needed was a way to pierce their social shell, to let everyone around them see what they were hiding. That's when the idea of a symbol came to me. Back when Thomas was alive, I worked as a tailor. My fingers knew cloth the way some know wood or clay. In the motel's dim light, I unpacked my old sewing kit. With Eloise's help, I gathered scraps, old fabric, pieces of lace she'd kept tucked in drawers. From them I stitched together a quilt, but this was no ordinary quilt. Every square told a piece of the story. One patch held an embroidered image of a locked door. Another showed a house with its windows blacked out. I stitched a small trunk, half open, its contents spilling into the dark. In the center I sewed Thomas's name, ringed by a circle of red thread, unbroken, eternal. It wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense, but it was powerful. Anyone who looked at it would feel the message: a life stolen, a home erased, a vow broken. When the quilt was finished, Eloise gasped. It's like evidence and protest all in one. Exactly. The opportunity to display it came sooner than I expected. Our town hosted an annual heritage fair, where locals set up booths to showcase crafts and stories of the past. My daughter-in-law adored that event. She loved being seen as part of the community's backbone. I signed up for a booth quietly, under my own name. No one paid much attention. On the morning of the fair, Eloise helped me drape the quilt across a stand. I placed a folder of notarized papers beside it, labeled clearly, Proof of Ownership. Whitfield Family Estate. Then, with my little camera rolling, I waited. People wandered by. Some stopped to trace the stitches with their fingers. I didn't have to say much, just a few words about memory, family, and promises. The quilt did the talking, and the documents at its side whispered of something even heavier: the law. By noon, a small crowd had formed. That's when my daughter-in-law appeared. Her face froze when she saw me standing there, my quilt spread wide, my name written bold. She tried to laugh it off, but whispers rippled through the crowd. What does she mean, proof of ownership? Someone asked. Another murmured, didn't they just redo the house? Strange timing. The murmurs grew louder, curiosity sharp as knives. My daughter-in-law stepped closer, her smile strained. Mother, she hissed, what do you think you're doing? I met her eyes steadily. Telling the truth, in public, where you can't erase it. Her hand trembled as she tried to tug the quilt down, but Eloise stepped in, firm as a wall. This is her booth. Touch it, and you'll have witnesses. And there were witnesses. Plenty of them. Cameras lifted. Phones recorded. The quilt, the documents, the confrontation, all preserved in broad daylight. By evening, Harris had already called. You made quite a scene, he said, not without a chuckle. But it was clever. Now they know you're not hiding. They'll have to tread carefully, because the court of public opinion can be harsher than any judge. I hung up the phone with my hand still shaking. Not from fear this time, but from exhilaration. I had taken the fight out of the shadows. Back at the motel, I folded the quilt carefully, smoothing its edges with trembling fingers. It wasn't just cloth anymore. It was a banner, a talisman, a declaration. I am still here. I am not erased. For the first time since my hospital discharge, I slept without waking to the hum of doubt. The plan was no longer just survival. It was exposure. It was law. It was story. And this time the story was mine to tell. The day of the town gathering arrived, and with it, the weight of every sleepless night I'd endured. I wasn't dressed in mourning black, nor in the shabby clothes my daughter-in-law liked to sneer at. I wore the navy dress my late husband once told me made me look like I owned the room. For the first time in months, I believed him. The hall buzzed with chatter when I walked in. Old neighbors, the church ladies, even the mayor. Everyone was there, My son and his wife stood near the front, playing host as though the land, the house, and everything else had always been theirs. I waited until the speeches were nearly done. Then, when silence settled, I stepped forward. My cane clicked against the wooden floor. Every eye turned to me. "I have something to say," I began. My voice didn't shake, though my heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. At first, a few polite nods. Then discomfort. My daughter-in-law crossed her arms, her smile tight as thread pulled too far. My son, my own flesh and blood, looked away. I held up a small bundle, a quilt. Not just any quilt, but the one I had pieced together decades ago, each square stitched with the story of our family, our wedding, the harvests, the year our son was born. I spread it across the table for all to see. "This house they claim is theirs," I said, my hand steady on the fabric. "Was bought with these hands and the hands of my husband. Every nail, every board, every brick, earned and paid for. And this," I pointed to the quilt, "is the proof of who we are and who is erasing us." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The quilt wasn't just fabric, it was evidence. On one square, a stitched copy of the deed, dated and signed. On another, a photograph sewn in, my husband holding the original title. Then came the real blow. I pulled from my bag the new deed, filed and stamped by the county clerk. My lawyer had made sure it was airtight. The land, the house, the business, it was now placed in a trust with my name at the top. No son, no daughter-in-law, no cruel hand could touch it. "You changed the locks," I said, looking directly at my son. "You took my photographs down. You treated me like a guest in the home I built. But you forgot, I keep records. I keep promises. And I keep my word." My daughter-in-law sputtered, red blooming across her cheeks. "She's making this up. She's confused. Everyone knows she's been sick." But her voice cracked, and the murmurs in the hall swelled against her. Neighbors whispered about the locks, about the sudden redecorating, about the way they'd seen me at the motel. People knew more than they had admitted. Now, with the truth laid bare, they found their voices. My son opened his mouth, but no words came. Only silence, heavy, shameful silence. I didn't cry. Not there, not in front of them. Instead, I gathered the quilt back into my arms, folded it carefully, and looked out at the people who mattered. I'm not asking for pity. I'm asking for respect, for the life I built, and for the promise my husband made. And I'll make sure, with every breath left in me, that it's honored. The lawyer, standing quietly at the back, stepped forward then. "Just to confirm," he said clearly, his voice echoing in the hall. "All property rights are now secured under Mrs. Walker's trust. Any attempts to alter or claim them otherwise will be challenged in court." It was done. The tide had turned. My son's face collapsed into something I couldn't quite name. Regret, maybe, or just the sting of being caught. My daughter-in-law's glare could have cut glass, but neither mattered anymore. When I walked out of that hall, cane clicking, quilt pressed to my chest, I wasn't walking alone. The crowd parted for me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the weight of dignity return. This was my home, my story, and I had taken it back. In the days that followed the confrontation, the air around me felt different, lighter, as if a storm that had hung for months over my shoulders had finally broken and passed. The locks on the house were changed again, this time by my lawyer, with me standing right there as the new keys were pressed into my hand. My son wasn't there to watch. Neither was his wife. They didn't call, didn't visit, didn't even try to argue anymore. And yet, for the first time, I wasn't waiting by the phone. Their silence no longer hollowed me out. It freed me. I moved back into the house slowly, carrying my things one bag at a time from the motel. Each step up the porch felt like reclaiming ground I thought I'd lost forever. Inside, it looked different. Cold, bare, scrubbed of me. But I wasn't afraid of the emptiness. It meant I could fill it again. On the mantel, I set a framed photo of my husband, smiling the way he used to after a long day of work. Beside it, I unfolded the quilt and draped it across the back of the sofa. For the first time in months, the house breathed like home. I didn't set out to ruin my son. I didn't want vengeance, not really. I wanted what was mine, what was promised, what was earned, what was sacred. And I had it again. Neighbors began stopping by. Some brought pies, some just their words. They whispered that they had suspected, that they had seen, but hadn't known how to speak up. Now, seeing me back where I belonged, they said they were proud of me. I didn't know if proud was the word, but I felt steady, and that was enough. At night, I walked the halls of the house in silence. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the old lamps, every breath of air through the windows felt like proof. I was still here. The house was still mine. The promise was unbroken. I knew my son would live with his choices. Maybe one day he'd regret them. Maybe he wouldn't. But I couldn't carry that weight anymore. That was his burden, not mine. I carried my own burdens plenty long. Now, I carried something else. My dignity, repaired like a cracked vase glued carefully back together. Fragile, maybe, but whole. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the sun set across the fields, I thought back to that first night in the hospital. To the loneliness, the fear, the sharp sting of betrayal in my son's voice over the phone. I had left that hospital with nothing but pain and doubt. But now I sat taller. Not healed completely, but stronger. Not erased, not forgotten. The land stretched out in front of me, golden in the last light. I whispered to my husband's photograph on the mantel. I kept the promise. I kept us. And for the first time in months, I slept through the night without fear. This wasn't just a house. It wasn't just land or papers or deeds. It was me, my story. And no one, not even my own blood, could take it away again. When everything was stripped away, what I found waiting under the dust was not just anger. It was a hard, quiet love for the life I had built. That life was stitched from small, steady choices. The nights at the sewing machine, the dinners on a wobbly table, the roof patched by candlelight, the promise my husband made and the way I kept it. They could change the locks and take the photographs, but they could not remove the years of work and care that made that house a home. If this story touched you, remember this. Dignity isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a patient act done one careful stitch at a time. Sometimes it's choosing the law over a shout, the record over rumor, the slow gathering of witnesses instead of a single dramatic scene. And sometimes, most days, it's simply deciding you are worth standing up for. If you have a similar story or know someone who does, share it gently in the comments. Your voice matters. If you want more true story endings where ordinary people reclaim power in quiet, smart ways, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. A like helps other listeners find this story, and sharing it could mean someone else feels less alone tonight. Thank you for listening all the way through. Your time, your empathy, and your willingness to sit with hard truths keep these stories alive. And sometimes, that's exactly the difference between being erased and being remembered. If you're able, leave a kind comment below or share this with someone who needs to hear they're not alone.